Okay. Let us start. Today we try to cover two or three chapters, but the first one is about measuring employment and unemployment. In this section, actually, we are just going to discuss about a large-scale sample survey, right? What are the problems rising and how that kind of sample space is done, and how the problems are solved, and so on. So there's no much mathematics here, just a description, just to give you some brief idea, basic idea about a large-scale survey, right? Actually, this is coming from US. I don't know how they are doing it here. The census and statistics department are also doing the similar ones, but I think they are doing a different way. But anyway, according to the book, we will discuss about the survey done in US to measure the unemployment rate, for example. So first of all, we need to get some idea about some words. There are some definitions. So, who is a person considered to be employed, right? So, this basic idea we have what is meant by employed person and what is meant by unemployed person. So, this is the qualification for an employed person. Right? Person is considered employed if during a specified reference period, usually at least 1 week, the person satisfies at least one of the following conditions, then that person is considered as an employed person. Right? So the first one is obvious, worked for pay or profit. Right? Some work for pay or profit. This includes full-time, part-time, temporary or casual employment, as well as self-employed. You get a pay or a profit. And then there are other groups like working without a pay in a family business, right? Even if you don't get a so-called payment, but if you are working in a family business, provided the person work for at least a minimum number of hours during this period, then that person is considered as an employed person.
So if it's not a family business or a farm, does it count as slavery?
Sorry?
If it doesn't count as family business or farm when you are working without pay, does it count as slavery?
It has to be, yeah. It's not considered as a employed person in that case, right? Or maybe a person still actually has a job but has not worked for a period because of illness or some other reason, still he is considered as employed. Of course, that has to be, no? But there are two important clarifications. First of all, both formal and informal workers are included, so it doesn't matter whether the person is a formal, so-called formal, like or informal sector workers. But of course, unpaid domestic work performed within their own house is not considered as employed. So your mothers and sisters who are working at home is not considered as an employed person, right? So that's how it's defined.
So if someone has like a passive income, for example, he has some fixed deposit or something and he doesn't do anything.
So he's not employed. He has an income. That's a different thing. He is not employed in that case, right? So one will think that those are not employed or unemployed. No, it's not like that. Unemployed persons also have to have some characteristics for them to be called unemployed. Right? So they must have no job, right? No job, but they must be available for job. For example, they must be kind of looking for a job. He doesn't have a job, but looking for a job, right? Available for job. Actively seeking employment during specified recent period. So those are the people who are called unemployed. Right? So if a person doesn't have a job, but he is also not interested in finding a job or not seeking a job, he is not considered as unemployed. He is not, right? He is something else, right? So we need another word, labor force. So labor force is considered to be the totality of employed and unemployed. Right? So those who are not having a job but not seeking a job, also not coming into the labor force. Labor force is the collection of employed and unemployed only. So employed or unemployed, individuals who are not working and are not actively seeking employment are not included in the labor force. So based on those definitions, unemployment rate is defined as the percentage of labor force that is unemployed at the given time. It is calculated by number of unemployed persons divided by the total labor force times 100 as a percentage. So that's what the people call the unemployment rate at a given time. Unemployment rate, of course, change, right? It changes time to time, but at a given time, that's what it means. Right. So now we will look at what US is doing to actually kind of what we do is not really actually calculating the actual value of unemployment rate. What we can do is estimate, right? Get a rough approximate value for this actual value. So for that actually they carry out a survey, right? It's not a census. There are censuses also time to time, but they for this purpose they are doing a kind of survey going through the every month. It's going through the whole year, right? So in US, the government agency in charge of employment numbers is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So that's the organization in charge of publishing these numbers. So employment statistics are estimated from a sample survey. This sample survey is called the current population survey. So it has a broader objectives actually, not only to estimate the unemployment rate, it's also estimating some other quantities. So therefore it's called current population survey. Employment statistics are estimated, so that's an important word. We are not actually getting the real value, calculating the value, actual value, but we are getting an estimate, so therefore there is bound to be some kind of error always. This survey is conducted monthly for the Bureau of Labor Statistics by the Census Bureau. So it's a monthly, every month the census is going on. So in every month, during the week containing the 19th day of the month, a field staff of interviewers canvasses a nationwide probability sample, that is a random sample of people. Right. So this is a particular week, right? The week that contains the 19th of the day is the week that they are doing is. The size of the labor force, the unemployment rate, and host of other economic and demographic statistics like distribution of income, educational level, etc., are also estimated using the same survey. In addition to the unemployment rate, there are several others. Right. So the current population survey is actually this we have to have a design for this survey. Right? It's a very large scale survey. So I mean, design means how it is carried out from the beginning to the end. Right? So this design has to be updated time to time, because this design usually based on the current population and several other features in the population. Right? So once you have, for example, a census that is done for the whole country, based on that information, new information, this census also redesigned. They are redesigning the way that has to be done, right? For example, there was a major redesign in the early 2000s using the data from the census done in 2000. Right? So just after the census, there was a redesign, and now I think we are talking about that one in the book here. So at that time, there were 3,142 counties and independent cities. So I don't have a pretty good idea about these words, but counties are, I think, smaller areas. But there are sometimes large cities, they are not considered as counties, so they are separately counted as a city. So altogether, 3,142 such areas, counties and independent cities. So using the data from 2000 census, the Bureau put these together into groups of 2025 primary sampling units. So they reduce little bit by combining, for example, some small counties together. Right? Few are going to be collected together, but maybe sometimes one county is considered as one PSU also, right? Because it only 3,142 reduced to 2025. So obviously only few have been collected. So they have put them together into 2025 primary sampling units. Each PSU consisted either of a city or a county or a group of close by counties, contiguous counties. Then after that, so these primary sampling units were sorted into even a small number of strata, 8,824 strata. So they were grouped. These PSUs were grouped into several strata, 824, chosen so that PSUs in each strata would resemble each other on certain demographic and economic characteristics. So whenever you group them into strata, remember in the previous class I mentioned the two words, stratum, the singular word, strata is the plural word, and there's another word called cluster, right? Stratified random sampling we have strata, cluster sampling we have clusters. The difference between these two is within the stratum, the units are very similar with respect to some characteristics, right? But within a cluster, they are quite different with respect to these ones. When you consider one cluster has to, if ideal situation, it has to resemble the whole population, right? But if you consider stratums are different. Between stratums, they are different. One stratum may be different from another stratum completely, but within the stratum, they are homogeneous, very similar, right? So these PSUs were put into these strata so that into 824 strata, so that within a strata there are similar PSUs. So they don't have to be close by necessarily, but they have a list of these PSUs, and then using the information from the censuses, they group them into this many strata. Right. So here in this survey, the sample was actually selected, final units were selected through two stages. Right? So now you have primary sampling units, and then we have the strata. Right? At the first stage, one PSU was chosen from each strata. Right? So we have now 824 strata. Right? So maybe one strata is just one town, it's possible, right? Sometimes there may be several counties or towns within a strata. One PSU was chosen from each strata using a probability method, which ensured that within a stratum, the chance of PSU getting into a sample was proportional to its population. So what they used was actually from each stratum they selected one PSU using something called probability proportional to size. Probability proportional to size. Right? So that means a large PSU has a higher chance of being selected. Only one PSU is selected. So one has to be selected. Maybe if there is only one, then it has to come. But if there are more than one PSU, then they have to be selected randomly. Right? So one way to select is simple random sampling. In the simple random sampling, each PSU will have equal probability. But what here they do was not like that. They use the probability proportional to sampling unit. So let me briefly explain what that means just by an example. Suppose, for example, in PSU, suppose there are 3 counties. So county 1, county 2, county 3. So from the previous census, we know their population size, how many households in each of these. Suppose, for example, suppose we know from the previous census there are 1,000 households in county 1, there are 2,000 households in county 2, or maybe 3,000 here. Suppose we know these like this. Then you want to select one of these three with size proportional to the probability proportional to the size, with probability proportional to size. Can you suggest a method to select one county, right, using probability proportional to these numbers? Can you think of
One
one?
county.
One county. You have to select one county. Now there are three counties in this PSC.
So get the average of the households in a county, then
What do you mean by average?
so there are 1,000.
Yeah.
There are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000.
Yeah,
And
households.
yeah, so average households in a county is 2,000.
Yeah.
So that's closer to the C2, so I would choose C2.
But that, how does that give you the probability proportional to the size? What I want is the probability of being selected has to be proportional to the size. Size means number of households, right? So that means C1 should come with probability 1/6. C2 should be selected with probability 2/6. C3 should be selected with probability 3/6. So that's what you mean by probability proportional to size. So your method will not guarantee that. The probability is that. One thing, very easy thing we can do is, for example, let's say for example, we assign numbers 1 to 1000 here, and then 1000, 1 to 3000 here, and then 3000, 1 to 6000 here. Right. And we randomly select a number, one number from 1 to 6000. Any number from 1 to 6000 using a computer randomly. And then if my number is between 1 and 1000, I will select C1. If my number is between these two, then I will select C2. If my number is between these, I will select C3. So that will guarantee that the probability of any of these being selected, one has to be selected, is proportional to the number of households. So that's a very simple method. So they use something like that. So from each of these 824 strata, they select one PSU. Therefore, altogether, they select 824 PSUs first. So that is the first stage. 824 PSUs. So, for example, this is not actually the same survey that we are giving here, the details, but it's something previously. This shows the PSUs. Actually, in this case, 792 PSUs were selected. This is 1995 survey. So, in this situation, what we are talking about 854, maybe similar to that. So, from the whole country, certain PSUs were selected first, like that. So, at the second stage, each selected PSU was divided up into ultimate sampling units, consisting of about 4 housing units each. Right? So, now we have selected 824 PSUs. Now, within those selected PSUs, what they did was they group all the houses into by blocks of 4. 4 households is one ultimate sampling unit, like that. Right. So in that case, they select the 4 houses close by. Right. So one ultimate sampling unit consists of 4 houses. So out of these ultimate sampling units, some of them were selected at random. In this case, they use simple random sampling. So they have a list of these ultimate sampling units using simple random sampling. In that case, they selected some number of PSUs from each PSU. Right? They selected some number of ultimate sampling units from each selected PSU. Right? So the number, how many ultimate sampling units have to be selected, was actually pre-calculated based on so many things, including how much precision they want in the estimates and so on. But roughly, They first of all decide the total number of households they want to include in the survey. So suppose for example that is equal to n, they have decided to take all together n households. That depends on how much money they can spend and all those things, time they can spend all together. Based on those things they will decide n. So n has to be equal to, if you say the number of ultimate sampling units from PSU is m, so m times 4 times 824 should be equal to n, right? Because number of households. So thereby you can find out m is equal to n divided by 4 times 824. So roughly we know I have idea about how many households we should select from each PSU. Right. So in the end, so once they have selected the ultimate sampling units, so one sampling unit, ultimate sampling unit has 4 households. So they go to each of those 4 houses, and then every person age 16 or over living in those houses are interviewed, right? Using a certain questionnaire, they ask several questions and they report those things. So that is how basically it is done, right? That is the design at least, right? So the main objective of this survey was to estimate the unemployment rates in each of the 50 states separately. They wanted to get unemployment rate at the end. They wanted to say, okay, unemployment rate in this state is this much, this state is this much, and so on. 50 values, and states and districts of Colombia. District of Colombia maybe not be a state, I don't know. With about the same precision. So that was a very specific objective. They want to have these estimates with the same precision, right? The variability of these things should be roughly the same. They don't want, for example, precision is something close to accuracy, right? So they don't want some estimate to be more accurate, highly accurate, and some estimates to be very less accurate. So they want to have roughly the same precision because they are going to publish these things, so there are many people using them, so people don't know these differences, so they might use these things for different purposes, so therefore they have roughly the same accuracy, right? So that was one main objective, right? Estimates have to have from different states have to have roughly the same precision. So in that case, based on that idea, they have to decide how many households actually should come from each state, right? Because the precision of the estimates depends on the sample size that have come from each state. So that also have to be considered when they are deciding the sample sizes, right? These m's and n's and everything, that has to be decided also, right? Usually this unemployment rate is a proportion, no, it's the number of unemployed people divided by the labor force, no? So it's a proportion. So usually this kind of proportion estimates, the precision of that is proportional to 1 over the square root of the sample size, 1 over square root of n. N here I used earlier n for this total sample size, but here we are talking about number of households from each state. So, so the precision of the estimate for the state is proportional to 1 over square root of the number of households selected from that household. Right? So that also has to be considered when they are deciding the sample size. So what I want to just say is that this is not a very simple thing. There are so many calculations that have to be done to decide what is the total number of sample size they are going to consider, and then what is the total number of households they want to have from each state, and then from each primary sampling units, how many secondary sampling units have to be selected. So all those have to be decided before they are collecting data, right? So there are some complicated mathematics going on. We are not discussing it, but roughly saying what they are doing. Right? So therefore, once they have decided the number of households coming from each state, for example, uh, the numbers are the same, roughly the same from each state. Numbers are the same. So therefore, the sampling rate, if somebody quotes a sampling rate will be different, because the sampling rate is equal to the number in the sample divided by the total number of households in the state. The total number of households in the state is different from state to state. There are very large states, small states, and so on. So therefore, the sampling rate will be different from state to state, but the sample size will be roughly the same from state to state. So this is called equalizing sample sizes, not the equalizing sample rates. Sometimes people do that also, but in this case they are using equalizing sample sizes because they wanted to have same precision in the estimates for different states. So that's what is talking about here. For example, if you look at overall, right? If you consider the total number of households that are going to be selected divided by the total number of households in the country, the answer will be around 1 into 20,000. Right? So that is the overall sampling rate if they do this calculation and decide on the numbers. But of course, from individual states, if you look at the sampling rates, they are going to be changing very much. For example, from DC, Washington DC, it will be around 1 in 300, whereas in Wyoming, it might be 1 in 3,000. So rates may be different because this number of households in different states are different. Now, so that I told you how to select one sample, right? But actually, this bureau selects not only one sample may have several number of households, but so that is going to be one list of households. But actually, they are selecting beforehand. They are selecting 16 different lists like that, 16 different samples. Right? Each sample has the same number. Why are they taking 16 samples? As I told you, this survey is going to be in every month. Right? So if one sample, if all the households, the same households are going to be interviewed every month, what will happen? Right? Every month somebody is coming to your house and asking the same questions. It will be a very big problem, right? So in order to avoid this problem, they have selected actually 16 different samples. So these samples are different, right? 16 different samples. So they are kind of rotating the sampling based on using these 16 samples. After a households get into a sample, it is kept there for 4 months. So from one list, suppose you have your house is in the list, so these people will come to your house in the first 4 months. First 4 months they will come and ask the questions, and then the next 8 months they will not come to your house. And then after that, again next year, first 4 months they will come to your house like that. Right. So it will be like this. Right. Once a household is selected from one list, a housing unit is interviewed every month for the first 4 months, and the next 8 months in that year, it's not temporary out of the sample, they are not going to be interviewed, and then next again 4 months it will be interviewed again. So how these 16 samples are going to work? It's like this. Suppose for example sample 1 starts in January, right? All the houses in sample 1 are going to be interviewed then from January to April, right? And then those houses will not be interviewed from May to December, and then again they will be interviewed next January to April. So that's the houses in the first list. Then the houses in the second list will start in February. So February, March, April, May, those houses will be interviewed. So those are different houses, right? Not the same houses previously. So like that, it's going to be rotated. So if you consider a particular month, in a single month, there will be 8 of these 16 samples active. 8 of these 16 samples will be active, other 16 will not be active. Among the 8 active samples, some are being interviewed for the first time. Some are being interviewed for the first time, some are interviewed for the second time, some are being interviewed by the third time, some are being interviewed by the fourth time within a given year. That some are maybe in the final, in the fourth. As a result, about 75% of the sample overlaps with the previous month. Right? 75%. About 25% new entering the survey for the first time. So a little bit complicated. මේ විදිහට තමයි මේක plan කරලා තියෙන්නේ. මේ විදිහට තමයි කරගෙන යන්නේ. So why do we do this rotating using 16 samples? As I mentioned, one thing is actually the people get bored, right? එකමදී එකම සැරේ ඉන්නකොට මිනිස්සු ගහලා පනවන්න පුළුවන් හැමදාම ඕම නැතිලා ඉන්නේ නැහැ. 19 මිනිත් දෙන සතියේ ඉන්නේ හැමතිස්සෙම. ෆික්ස් සතිය කියනවා හැමදාම ප්‍රශ්න අහන්න බලයි ඉතින් මේ වැඩ කරපලාද ඉදිරියට වැඩ කරන්නේ නැද්ද ඊට ඇවිල්ලා so many questions are asked. So this is going to be a problem. So to kind of reduce that, not going to be completely eliminated, but at least to reduce, they are doing this. So some of the advantages are like this. First of all, if for example people are going to select samples every month, right? A different sample, that's going to be more costly. So that this will reduce the cost because the same sample, at least selected sample, will be used for 4 months or at least. No? So therefore, in that way, it's going to reduce the cost. Improved precision for month-to-month change. This, for example, now employment rate changes, right? For example, one person may be employed this month, he may not be employed next month. Right? So there are employment number of people who are employed will change sometimes by a big amount, right? So if you don't do this thing every month, you cannot catch what are the changes. Right? So if you because of this rotation, it can be done easily. Therefore, for example, one sample is doing it for 4 months. එතකොට දැන් මේ 4 months කරනකොට මේ මාසෙදර ඊළඟ මාසෙට වෙන change එක අල්ල ගන්න පුළුවන්. එතකොට දැන් මේකේ මේ house එකේ වෙන එක හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. ඊට පස්සේ අනිත් sample එකෙත් ඒ වගේ වෙනවනේ. එතකොට හැම ඉවක් houses වල ගොඩාක් houses වල because you need a large sample in order to get good estimate. So you get a good estimate of the changes from a large number of households when you have 16 out of 16, 8 are always actively. So the 8 samples, from 8 samples you get this information. Reduction of respondents and interview fatigue. This is the one that we first mentioned. Repeated interviewing for too long may cause interviewers to wear out their welcome. And respondents to become less cooperative. Rotating limits this burden. And then mitigation of panel bias. This is an important thing, that a kind of a bias that can come when you are doing, if you are, for example, asking question every month, for example, panel bias. I will come to that later. What do you mean by panel bias? Responses can change simply because the household has been interviewed before. This is called panel conditioning. Rotating households reduces the build-up of such bias. Sometimes පළවෙනි කියවිල්ලද වෙනි කෙනෙකුටත් තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් මොහොත හතර පස්සට කෙනෙකුට ගොඩක් වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒකට ඒක එකතු වෙන එක අමතන්න. Right. So panel bias arises in surveys when the same individuals or households are interviewed repeatedly over time. So this is called a panel. Right? Because of repeated participation, respondents may change their behavior or the way they answer questions. So the responses no longer represent what would have been observed from the fresh sample of the population. පළවෙනි සැරේ එන එක දැන් තියෙන තත්ත්වය අපිටම එම්ප්ලොයිඩ් කිව්ද නැද්ද කියලා අහන්න පුළුවන්. සමහරවිට පළවෙනි ප්‍රශ්නේදී we will usually the interviews will explain what they mean by employed and not employed, but still from the first interview they might not understand it completely. ඒකට ඒ තේරෙන විදියට තමයි ඒකට උත්තරේ දෙන්නේ. මොකද දෙවෙනි සැරේට එනකොට ආයෙ සැරයක් පැහැදිලි කරනවනේ, තුන්වෙනි සැරේට එනකොටත් ආයෙ පැහැදිලි කරනවා. එතකොට එතනදී වඩා වැඩිපුර තේරෙලා මේ වෙන උත්තරයක් දෙන්න පුළුවන්. අර ඉස්සෙල්ලා දුන්න උත්තරේ වැරදි වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ වගේ වෙන්න පුළුවන්. For example panel bias කියන එක මෙන්න මේ විදිහට වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Condition respondents learn what questions will be asked and adjust for their answers. පළවෙනි එකේ දන්නේ නැහැ මොනවද අහන්න යන්නේ කියලා ඒ දැන් තමයි පළවෙනි වතාවට ප්‍රශ්නට උත්තර දෙන්නේ. හැබැයි දෙවෙනි එකට ඒගොල්ලෝ දන්නවා මොන ප්‍රශ්නද අහන්න යන්නේ කියලා. එතකොට plan කරලා මොන හරි අවශ්‍ය විදියට වෙනස් වෙලා දෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. So that can change the final results. Increase awareness. ඒකනොත් bias එකක් ඇති වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ආයෙසෙන් දැන් මම කියවාගේ ප්‍රශ්නේ තේරුම්. Right. Respondents may pay more attention to topics covered by the survey. මේකෙන් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්නේ මොකක්ද කියලා දැනගත්තට පස්සේ උදාහරණයක් විදිහට අපි හිතමු අහනවා නම් රසාවක් කරනවද නැද්ද රසාවක් කරන්නේ නැත්නම් මොනවද දෙන්න යනවා කියලා අපි හිතමු ආධාරයක් දෙන්න යනවා කියලා දැන් රසාවක් තිබුණත් නැහැ කියලා කියන්න පුළුවන්. Right. Response fatigue. Respondents give quicker or less thoughtful answers over time. Right. එතකොට පස්සට ඉන්න අර වැඩි කල්පනා කරලා මොකක් හරි උත්තරයක් දෙන එක වෙන්න පුළුවන්. So that's bias. So they all are called panel bias. As a result, responses from panel members may differ systematically from those of the first time respondents. Example, in a labor force survey, consider the labor force survey in which households are interviewed repeatedly and asked whether any adult is actively looking for a work. So in the first interview, respondents who occasionally checks job advertisements may answer no. Right? Yeah, job he is not very interested in or very rarely look at advertisements and so on. Therefore, he will say, no, I'm not looking for a job. No, so actually he must be considered as not employed, but මොකකටවත් අටින්නේ මොකද යා ජොබ් එක බලාපොරොත්තු හොයනවද කියලා අපම නෑ කියලා කියන්නේ. I looking for a job කියපම නෑ කියන මොකද කලාතුරකින් තමයි හොයන්නේ. ඒකට ඒකෙදී යා අර කොට දෙකටම වැටෙන්නේ නෑ. employed එකට වැටෙන්නේ නෑ. unemployed එකට වැටෙන්නේ නෑ. but දෙවෙනි එකට එනකොට ආයෙසරයක් හොඳට තේරිලා මේ ප්‍රශ්නේ මොකක්ද හරියටම අහන්නේ කියලා තේරිලා ඊට පස්සේ yes කියන්නත් පුළුවන්. Right. After several interviews, the respondent learns that checking advertisements or sending applications counts as active job search. Therefore, in that case, he will say yes, I'm looking for a job, but I don't have a job, and so it will be considered as unemployed. In later interviews, the respondents may answer yes, even though their actual job search behavior has not changed. Right. මුලදීම යා කවුන්ට් වෙන්නේ නැහැ කොමුකේටවත් ඊළඟ එකට එනකොට ජොබ්ලස් කියලා තමයි ඒක කවුන්ට් වෙන්නේ. එතකොට මේ මුලදීත් එයා ජොබ්ලස්. නමුත් දැන් මේ අන්තිමට එනකොට මෙයා වැඩි එක්කෙනෙක් වැඩි වෙලා වගේ. එතකොට මේ අන්එම්ප්ලොයිමන්ට් රේට් එක වැඩි වෙලා වගේ තියෙනවා. ඔය වගේ 100 දෙනෙක් උත්තර දුන්නොත් එහෙමනේ. අන්එම්ප්ලොයිමන්ට් රේට් එක වැඩි වෙලා වගේ තියෙනවා. මොකද මුලදී කවුන්ට් වුණේ නැහැ. දැන් කවුන්ට් වෙනවා. එතකොට that's the bias. The observed change is therefore due to repeated interview rather than a real change in employment behavior. If you look at another example, for example, in a household expenditure panel survey, first time respondents may forget to under report small routine expenses. Then expensive income expenditure එකේදී අහනවා income එක කොච්චරද expenditure කොච්චරද මේ දේවල් වලට ඊදන් කරපු දේවල් කොච්චරද කියලා අහනවා how much. ඒත් පොඩි දේවල් අමතක කරලා ලොකු දේවල් විතරක් ඉස්සෙල්ලා එකතු කරලා කියන්න පුළුවන් this is the expenditure. නමුත් you must consider all the expenditure. But the first time respondents may forget to underreport small routine expenses. After repeated interviews, respondents learn to keep reports and report expenditures more accurately. එතකොට ඉස්සලා expenditure එක අඩුවට report කරනවා පස්සේ යනකොට expenditure අර ඇත්තටම ඔක්කොම දානවනේ දැන් වැඩි වෙලා ගිහලා. එතකොට expenditure වැඩි වෙලා ගිහලා තමයි අන්තිමට වෙන්නේ. නමුත් මුලදීකම තමයි සමහරට අගක් තියෙන්නේ. So that will give you a bias. All right. So another advantage of this rotating 16 is continuous measurement with regular sample refreshment. එතකොට continuously මේක කරගෙනත් යනවා නැවත නැවත අලුත් samples එනවා මොකද පළවෙනි list එක දෙවෙනි list එක තුන්වෙනි list එක ආදී වශයෙන් යන. So therefore that's an advantage. Okay, so that actually that was describing the design part. So how do we actually carry out this? Right. Yeah, we decided to take this many from each PSU and so on, and what are the ultimate sample units that are going to be selected, and everything is decided. But then, for example, in 2005 survey, there were 72 housing units selected at the first, right, to be canvassed each month. 72,000 housing units. That was the total sample size expected. But of course, out of these 72,000, they found that when they are really doing this, they found that 12,000 were ineligible because there were no houses like that. Right? Even though they were in the list, when they went to the places, there were no houses. Sometimes the houses were demolished, right? Or maybe those places are vacant, nobody is there, right? So people cannot collect data from those houses. And then about 4,500 are unavailable. Even though houses are there, people are living there. By the time they go to the house, nobody is there to answer, right? No one at home or refuses. Sometimes even the people are there, they refuse to answer. Right, so that kind of things can happen in a real interview. So in this case, about 4,500 were like that. So that left only 50,500 housing halls to get the actual data. Even though they started with 72,000, they had to be happy with 50,500 households to collect data. So from these houses, all persons aged 16 years or over living in the selected households were interviewed. The main question they asked was, the respondents asked about their work experience in the previous week. So මෙතනදී මේ employed unemployed කියලා decide කරේ දැන් 19 වෙනිදා තියෙන සතියේ තමයි යන්නේ. ඊට කලින් සතියේ යන සලකලා තමයි අර employed unemployed කියන එක define තීරණය කරන්නේ. So based on their answers, individuals are classified into one of the groups, employed, unemployed, or outside the labor force. So in the previous work, if they were satisfying those conditions, they were working for pay or something else, or they were doing their business and whatever, according to that previous definition, they divided or categorized these people into employed, unemployed, or outside the labor force. A person is classified as employed if they did any paid work in the previous week or were temporarily absent from the regular job. Right? You were carrying in. If employed, additional information was collected. For example, how many hours you worked in the last week, type of the job you did in the last week, that kind of questions were asked.
Why didn't they collect their salary?
Huh?
Why didn't they collect their salary?
මෙතනදී salary එක වශයෙන් නැහැ, employed unemployed විදිහට දැනගන්න ඕනේ. මේකෙදි මේක වෙන income expenditure එකේදී මම හිතන්නේ ඒව හොයන්නේ. right? වෙනම survey එකක්. right? මේ survey එක තියෙන්නේ mainly for unemployment employment rates හොයන්න. එතනදී salary එක වඩා නැහැ, salary එකක් කියන්නේ නැහැ හරිද? ඒකට වෙනම tactics පාවිච්චි කරන්න ඕනේ. Beating around the bush දාත ගන්න ඕනේ. කෙලින්ම කියන්නේ නැහැ කවදාවත්. ඒත් ඒක වෙනම plan කරන්න ඕනේ. ඒක සලකලා මෙතන main idea එක තියෙන්නේ employment. Right. A person is classified as unemployed if he or she was not employed in the previous work, was available for but වැඩ කරන්න සූදානම් ඉඳලා තියෙන්න ඕනේ. ඒ වගේම actively looking for in the previous week. So එහෙමනම් තමයි unemployed කියලා satisfy කරන්නේ. If unemployed, එතකොට additional questions ආවා මේ වගේ දේවල්. කවදා හරි අන්තිමට තිබුණ job එකද මේ last week එක නෙමෙයි. What was the job that you had at the end for the last time? When and why you left that job, and methods used to look for the new job and so on. These data were collected also. an individual is classified as out of labor force if he or she is neither employed nor unemployed. And they were asked questions like this: are you keeping the house moved? Employed නැත්නම් unemployed නැත්නම් ගෙදර වැඩ කරගෙන ඉන්නවද කියලා අහනවා, right? Are you going to school? Are you unable to work for some physical reasons or anything? Not working for some other specific reason. එහෙම නැත්නම් මොන මොකක් හරි හේතුවක් නිසා වැඩ කරන්නේ. ඔය දත්ත ටික ලබා ගන්න. Right? So all these are asked actually, depending on the first answer, right? Whether you are employed or not or in the labor. So according to the information they collected, this is a simple table. These are in millions. Civilian non-estimated population 16 over estimates. Yeah, these are in millions. Employed 149, 4297, and unemployed 7.27. So මේ දෙක එකතුව තමයි this one is labor force, sum of these two. So ඊට අමතරව කට්ටියක් ඉන්නවා අර outside the labor force. The total is this. So from this unemployment rate is then going to be this number divided by this number, labor force. Total unemployed divided by the labor force times 100. So unemployment rate calculated like this is going to be 4.8%. So this actual table give you the overall, the total coming from. Of course, the data were collected from different states. So this 4.8% average of unemployment is the overall one. But actually, if you go to finer subgroups, for example, there will be quite different numbers coming from different states, different people groups, and so on. Usually, they publish these data into a finer subgroups also. Then from that we can actually see what differences are in different areas, different people groups, and so on. But overall, 4.8% unemployed according to this survey. To show that differences between, for example, in different groups, this table shows according to the race and sex and age. If you consider three variables, how the unemployment rates are different in those subgroups. For example, this is subgroup whites, males, age group, this one. So within that 15.1, right? So you can see that these numbers are very high between these because they are just I think at the very young age. But these also right here white, you can see quite difference here. Smaller number than 4.8 than for whites. More than roughly twice of 4.8 for blacks. So that you can see that difference very clearly there, right, in that age. And also here, the same thing, right. What else can you see? And when they, not from this one actually, when they compare this one and the previous ones, they saw that in this one we can see that males 15.1 in this group, 41 here, 15 and 12 here. Within white, even within white 15, this number is larger than this number. Within blacks also, male unemployment rate is much higher, right? So here this one is smaller, but this one is larger. This one is larger. This one is larger. So in general, you can see that in this case, male unemployment rate is higher than female unemployment rate by this year. But previously it was the other way around. Old days actually ladies didn't work usually. So at that time unemployment rate was higher among females. But now males have become sluggish, right? Even in the universities that's the same thing. people don't work, males don't work. Right? All the scholarships and the best student scholarships and everything is going to girls. Very rarely a male gets a prize, right? Very rarely a male gets a prize. So all these are going to girls. Sometimes the same girl giving several scholarships and several prizes for the best student.
So, can you say that male are looking for jobs than female? So, yeah, because when you said that, like in the past, women didn't work much, no?
Yeah.
So they weren't looking for work, no? So when they take that thing, they are taken it.
They were looking for නෑනේ සමහර ඉස්මුලදී ඉස්සර දැන් අපි රටේ ගත්තත් එහෙමනේ මිනි ගෑනු වැඩ කරන්න ඕනේ නෑ ගෑනු කියන කට්ටිය ගවලු ඉන්නුනේ වගේ අදහසක් මේක ඕගොල්ලෝ මොකක් කියලා අරින්න තමයි තිබුණේ. They were not even looking for. So ඒගොල්ලෝ වෙනම බර දෙකටම ඉන්නේ නෑ. ඒ unemployed එකට එන්නේ නෑ unemployed. Unemployed වෙන්නේ looking for වෙන්නේ නැහැ. එහෙම තත්ත්වයක් තිබුණේ. එතකොට පිරිමි තමයි working හෝ looking for දෙකම තියෙන්නේ. ඒතර ජයනුන්ගේ අර ඒ කතාව තමයි. Right. So in the book, for example, they have given you finer subgroups, how the numbers are different, but that table is very large, so I didn't put it here. But so people usually, these people publish these rates for smaller groups with respect to different variables like according to race, age, sex, type and everything, subgroups. Right. So that's what it says here. Even though the survey started with a very large number of national survey, of course, a reasonable amount is not available to India. That is one problem. So at the end of it, we had only 55,000, something like that. But now these people publish these estimates. For example, they publish what is the unemployment rate for this particular group, right? White men age 35 to 45 who had former managerial jobs, unemployed for more than 5 to 15 weeks, like according to like variables like this also they consider. Right? There may groups if they publish the unemployment rates for these groups, sometimes they may not be really reliable, because people in this each subgroup, maybe number of people in these subgroups may be small, very small. Right? So a small number again, ratio again, may group again, how many people in this group, number of unemployed people in that group divided by the total number of people in that group. The total number of people in that group in the sample is small now, that ratio is going to be not very reliable. So they publish them, but sometimes they are not going to be very reliable. Small subsamples lead to high sampling variability. Inferences about those subpopulations are therefore quite uncertain. එතකොට අපි ඉව පාවිච්චි කරලා කෙනෙක් කවුරු හරි යම්කිසි දෙයක් කියන්න යනවා නම් ටිකක් පරිස්සම් වෙන්න ඕනේ, මොකද ඒ estimates may not be that accurate. For example, suppose each survey estimate is people then calculate කරන්නේ අන්තිමට precision එක බොහෝ වෙලාවට within state precision එකයි සමාන වෙන්න ඕනේ ඒගොල්ලන්ට. නමුත් subgroups ගත්තාම precision එක සමාන වෙන්න පුළුවන්. ඉන්න sample size එක අනුව එක group එකේ වෙනස් වෙනවා. නමුත් අපි හිතමු උදාහරණයක් විදියට එහෙම තත්ත්වයක් තියෙනවා කියලා අපි හිතමු subgroups එකක් ගන්නවා. ඒ subgroups කීපයක් තුල අපි හිතමු එකම දෙයක් estimate කරලා තියෙනවා. Unemployment rate in subgroup suppose they have calculated it with 95% confidence, right? Within 1% of its true value, අපි හිතමු estimate එක අරගෙන තියෙනවා. They are sure that they are 95% sure that their estimate is within 1% of the actual value. එහෙම වෙන පරිදි estimate එක අවුත් කියනවා කියලා හිතන්නේ අපි 0 මෑප් පාවිච්චි කරලා they are 95% sure that their estimate is within the 1% of the actual value. එතකොට එක estimate එකක් තියෙනවා එක group එකකට ඒ විදිහට accurate කියලා ඒගොල්ලෝ කියනවා. තව estimate එකක් තියෙනවා තව group එකකට ඒකත් 95% sure that they are 95% sure that their estimate is within 1% of the actual value. There is another for subgroup, the same estimate, same parameter has been estimated. They have an estimate with 95% confidence. They are 95% confident that their estimate is within 1% of the true value. Like that, suppose there are several things. By then 95% කියන එක valid වෙන්නේ අර එකකට. Right? Now if you consider 10 of these, each one is separately 95% confident. හැබැයි overall confidence එක ගත්තොත් එහෙම 95% නෑ ඔක්කොම. ගොඩාක් අඩුයි. එතකොට ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් 95% accurate කියලා කියන්නේ 5% වැරදින chance එකක් තියෙනවා කියන එක. එතකොට one estimate has a 5% chance of being not correct. Not within 1%. It may be more than 1%. The difference between the actual value and the estimate may be more than 1%. තව එකක් ඒ වගේ 5% chance එකක් තියෙනවා. So overall there may be a large percentage of estimates which are quite far away, more than 1% far away from the actual value. What they are talking about is, even if people are talking about the 95% confidence interval or confidence about their estimates for individual values, if they consider several together, large proportion of them can be having a less confidence about the accuracy, not 95% in that case. So they have to be considered when you are analyzing and reporting these things. Right. So that's the same thing they are explaining. In practice, the Bureau produces many estimates simultaneously. So එක individual estimates of 95% confidence is not if you are looking at the separate collectively, out of those, for example, they say they estimate about 1,000 things from one survey. Each may have 95% or equal confidence about it. But if you consider them collectively, the overall confidence level may be much smaller than 95%. So we saw that Bureau uses a very large sample, but of course part of them were not able to collect the data. They use this large sample because they want to produce estimates for many subpopulations. So subpopulation is reasonable size we cannot make any inferences about it. So be reasonably confident about most estimates. We want to have large sample, subsamples. Therefore, we have at the overall we have a very large sample. But if, for example, there is some subgroup where the number of observations in that group is less than 50, usually they don't publish that information because that's very inaccurate. So they do not publish estimates when the subsample contains fewer than 50 observations. Okay, so that's how they plan it and carry out it. Now let's see how to actually get the estimates. What they do. They are doing something called weighting the sample when they can actually get the estimates, do the calculations. They are doing this thing because even though they are using some probability sampling methods, right? Probability sampling is random sampling methods. Because they are collecting data from a large number of these ultimate sampling units, there can be sometimes underrepresentation of particular groups or overrepresentation of particular groups within the selected sample. A simple random sample there is a small chance that the sample selected may not be really representative. If you take a simple random sample, that's a random sampling method. But if you take a random sample from a population where there are say 45% male and 55% female, But it is possible for the sample to contain maybe 60% male and 40% female. That's possible. There's a small chance. If that happens, then of course in that case the sample is not a real representation of the population. So here also they are using a kind of a probability sample, which is a random sampling method, but the sample may not be real representation. Right? From the previous census, we have some information about what the population representation is. Right? Population එකේ මෙන්න මේ age group වල ඇත්තටම කොච්චර ඉන්නවද? ඒ අද census එකකින් ආපුවා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා we can actually compare that representation, that proportions between the different groups and our sample. So එහෙම කරපුවාම සමහරවිට අපිට පේනවා we can see that there are real under representation or over representation. එතකොට එහෙම තියෙනවා කියලා දැක්කොත් එහෙම එතකොට එතනදී කරන දේ තමයි that is they are doing something called weighing the sample. Right? So when they get the estimates, they calculate weighted estimates rather than unweighted estimates. Then unweighted අපි weight කරේ නැත්නම් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට අපි ගෙලින්ම estimate කරන්නේ මේ නිකන් naive විදිහට. For example, suppose that in 1 month sample contains this many people and suppose these many people are unemployed. Right? අපි තුමු sampling rate එක අපි population එකකින් මේ 2000කට 1% ගෙන් තමයි select කරන්න තියෙන්නේ කියලා we know the sampling rate. So using this information we can actually estimate how many unemployed people in the whole population මේ sample එක representative එකක් වුණා නම් හරියට. Right? ඒකට 110,000 people වලින් එක තමයි sample size එක 3,836 was unemployed. So sample rate එක ගන්නවා. එතකොට population එකෙන් ගත්ත sample rate එකක් ගන්නවා. ඒ නිසා අපිට we can just calculate the total number of unemployed people in the whole population. So මේක තමයි එතන නියම ගත්තොත් එන උත්තරේ. නමුත් මේ විදිහට නෙමෙයි ඒගොල්ලෝ estimate කරන්නේ because usually in most of the cases they see there are underrepresentations and overrepresentations in subgroups. Therefore usually they carry out something called weighting. So this is what they mean by weighting, right? Not everyone in the population has the same probability of selection. So sampling rates can differ with respect to age groups, gender, race and area of residence and so on. So therefore they are using something called weighting. Otherwise the estimates can be bias estimates. So by chance, some groups may be overrepresented in the sample, or some groups may be underrepresented. Right? For example, too many white males in the පුළුවන් age group එක අපි දන්නවා කොච්චර ඉන්න ඕනද කියලා. We know how much there should be according to previous latest census, for example. So in our sample, maybe that's completely different. Therefore, maybe too many or too less. So therefore, that kind of thing can happen, right? So it's breaking up it bias estimates ලැබෙන්න පුළුවන්. So the group based weighting කියන එක තමයි apply කරන්නේ. The bureau divides the sample into groups based on different characteristics like age, sex, race and location. Each group is weighted up separately. Right? උදාහරණයක් දීලා තිනවා මෙතන. දැන් යම්කිසි group එකක් if we know that it is over represented, ඒ කියන්නේ තියෙන්න ඕන කාට වඩා වැඩියෙන් sample එකේ proportion එක තියෙනවා නම් ඒකට අපි ඒ එතනදී estimate එකට ඒ sample එකකින් estimate එකට පොඩි ගානකින් දශම ගානකින් වැඩි කරනවා. smaller weight එකක්. right? අපි දන්නවා නම් under represent වෙලා තියෙනවා කියලා තියෙන්න ඕන ගානට කිට්ටු ගානක් නැතුව ඊට අඩු ගානක් තියෙනවා නම් අපේ sample එකේ estimate එක වැඩි ගානකින් වැඩි කරලා තමයි අන්තිමට overall එක ගන්න. Right? Larger weights there. So usually this is what they do. For example, this is an example. Suppose the population is classified by age and gender, right? Like this. අපි හිතමු අපේ පහුගිය census එකකින් අපි දන්නවා population sizes in the age according to this there are two groups and there are two groups now altogether 4 groups. So 4 groups are in city the number of people there should be in the population. There are the population we know that. So they have a population share to we know the population share, this should be 10% and so on. That's the population share actual value. So the sample එක තමයි හොයාගන්න පුළුවන්. මොකද්ද sample share? So the sample එකේ මේ විදිහට නම් හිටියේ ඒ group එක. Sample share are these ones. So අපි හිතමු අපි sample එකෙන් අපි හොයාගෙන තියෙනවා කියලා මේ group එකේ 45 දෙනෙක් අපිට ඉන්නවා unemployed කට්ටිය. ඒ වගේ we have observed the number of unemployed in each group. එතකොට දැන් අපි පොදුවේ ඉස්සරලා මේක මුකුසල ගන්න නැත්නම් කරන්නේ මේ ටික ඔක්කොම එකතු කරලා ඉන්න නිකන් එකතු කරනවා. එකකින් වැඩි කරලා එකතු කරනවා. 45 දාන්න 18 දාන්න 21 දාන්න 14 බෙදීම 98. 98 නෙමෙයි 98 බෙදීම. එතකොට total sample size එක තමයි බෙදන්නේ. නමුත් මෙතනදී කරන්නේ මේකයි. දැන් ඉස්සරලාම weights ටික හොයාගන්න. For each value, the weights are going to be like this: population share divided by sample share. Right? So, population share sample share. So, for each, we find out the weight, right? So, like, population share is 110. Now, මෙතනදී 118ක් කියලා. ඒතර මේක over represented. ඒතර ඒක වැඩි වෙන්න ඕනේ කුඩා ගන්න. right? ඒතර අනිත් පැත්තේ ඒ වගේ 140ක් තියෙන ඕනේ ලාට 135යි තියෙන්නේ. ඒකට ඒක ලොකු ගානකින් වැඩි වෙනවා. So ඒ විදිහට ෂෙයා කරපුවම මේ විදිහට weights මෙතනදී එකට අඩු ගානක් මෙතනදී එකට වැඩි ගානකින් වැඩි වෙනවා. එතකොට අර 45 කියන එක number of unemployed කියන එක මේ පළවෙනි කාරණේ එකෙන් වැඩි කරනවා. You multiply the second one by this and so on. You give a weight like this. So 45 is the number unemployed in that particular group. This is the weight. And 18 is the number unemployed in that second group. This is the weight. So this is the weighted sum, not the. If you want to get the total number of unemployed in the sample, this is the weighted. So taking up the sample size එක අපි ගන්නවා 10යි. So it is the weighted unemployment rate in this case going to be 8%. ඒ විදිහට තමයි ඒගොල්ලෝ calculate කරන්නේ. So balance out to make that imbalance. So the benefits, what are the benefits? Bias එකක් වෙන්න පුළුවන් එක. The possible bias is corrected to some extent by doing this. Reduces the effect of chance variation, lowers overall sampling error, produces more reliable population estimates. Weights, benefits, right? So that's how they calculate the quantities. So once they calculate, of course, we know because this is a survey, this is not the census. We are not getting the data from the whole population. So there is always possibility of errors in our estimates. And we know that we use standard errors as measures of the size of these chance errors in the estimates, right? Chance error එක mind අපි දාගන්න බිම්බ තමයි යම් දෙස්සම standard errors කියන්නේ. එතකොට standard errors කියන රූපය දැන් we have already learned the formulas and so on for standard errors for the sum of values in the sample, for the average of values in the sample, standard error for the proportion of something in a sample and so on. We already know some formulas. We know two types of formulas. If the sampling is done with replacement, you use one set of formulas. Without replacement, you have to multiply that by finite sampling correction, right? N minus L divided by minus 1 square root that part. But that all is valid for simple random sampling, right? But here what we have is not really simple random sampling, right? We have a two-stage sampling. In the first stage is kind of a stratified, and then the stratified random sampling නෙමෙයි අපි කරන්නේ නියමෙ. ඊට පස්සේ දෙවෙනි stage එකේදී we are using a simple random sampling and so on, right? So in that kind of sampling plans, we cannot use those formulas, standard formulas. දැන් මෙතනදී මේගොල්ලෝ cluster sampling ගැන පොතේ තියෙන්නේ cluster sampling කරනවා වෙලාවට දැන් මේකත් මම හිතන්නේ මේගොල්ලෝ they have just considered this a kind of a cluster sampling. If you compare simple random sampling and cluster sampling, usually if you consider the same sample size at the end, cluster sampling usually has a large variation. Large variation because when you get the cluster sampling, you have less information. Within the simple random sampling, you get observations from individuals. ඉන්ඩිවිජුවල්ස් ගන්න. ඒතර ඉන්ඩිවිජුවල්ස් ගන්නකොට අර මුළු වේරියබිලිටි එකම මේ කවර් වෙනවා විවිධ. නමුත් දැන් ක්ලස්ටර් සැම්පලින් වලදී අපි මොකද්ද කරන්නේ? we select several clusters. Maybe one cluster or two clusters. Within a cluster, we assume that one cluster is the same as the whole population. හැබැයි ඒ assumption එක බොහෝ වෙලාවට හරියන්නේ නැහැ. clusters විදියට නිකම්ම මිනිස්සු කරනවා area එකක් cluster එකක් විදියට ගන්නවා. ඒ area එක මුළු population එකම represent කරන්නේ නැත්තම් එක cluster එකක් තෝරගත්තම මුළු population එකම represent වෙන්නේ නැහැ. දෙකක් තෝරගත්තත් එහෙම වෙන්නේ නැහැ. එතකොට අර information අපිට ලැබෙන information ප්‍රමාණය population information ඔක්කොම ලැබෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ නිසා variability එක වැඩි වෙනවා. එතකොට cluster intends to increase the standard errors. හැබැයි මෙතනදී අපි formulas දෙන්න යන්නේ නැහැ. මේක idea එක විතරයි කියන්නේ. ඒතර මේකෙන් කියන්නේ අර අපි usually use කරන formulas මෙතනදී පාවිච්චි කරන්න බෑ. So they are using a particular method in this particular survey that's called half sampling method to get idea about the standard error. The previous formulas cannot be used. They are using half sample method කියලා එකක් තමයි පාවිච්චි කරන්නේ. So briefly explain I will explain briefly what they mean by that. Then අපිට එක දෙයක් කරන්න පුළුවන් practically if possible. Right? Suppose you are using a some sampling plan or sampling plan. Cluster හරි mix එකක් හරි අපි estimate කරලා දෙනවා පාවිච්චි කරලා දෙනවා. We want to get a standard error of the estimate. එතකොට practically කරන්න පුළුවන් නම් කරන්න පුළුවන් දෙයක් තමයි 10 දෙනෙකුට විතර කියනවා මේ sample plan එක මේ 10 දෙනා වෙනම carry out කරන්න. Right? So same organization carry out the same sampling plan 10 times, more than one time. So එහෙම වුණාම වෙනම surveys වලින් වෙන estimates ලැබෙනවා. Estimates වෙනස් වෙනවා. මේ 10 දෙනාට එන sample සමානයි. එතකොට ඒකෙන් අපිට පුළුවන් මේ estimates වල variability එක කොච්චරද කියලා බලන්න. දැන් 10ක් තියෙනවා estimates. එතකොට ඒ 10 අගයන් 10ක් තියෙනවා. ඒකේ standard error එක ගත්තාම මේ estimates වල variability එක පිළිබඳ මිනිමක් ගන්න පුළුවන්. But that is not practically possible usually, right? To take more than one survey is not practically possible. එතකොට ඒ නිසා මෙතනදී මේගොල්ලෝ කරන්නේ කරපු survey එක දෙකට බෙදනවා. දෙකට නැත්නම් තුනට හතරට බෙදනවා. Right? So survey they randomly divide into several sub surveys. I think අපි නම් 50000ක් තිබුණා කියලා 10000 ඒවා පහකට බෙදලා randomly. ඊට පස්සේ මේ එක 10000ක් පාවිච්චි කරලා ඒකේ ආපු දත්ත පාවිච්චි කරලා අවශ්‍ය estimate එක ගන්න. අනිත් 10000න් වෙනම estimate එක. අනිත් 10000න් වෙනම estimate එක. එතකොට ඒ estimates ටික පාවිච්චි කරලා standard error එක estimate කරනවා. ඒ estimates. එතකොට අර 50000න් ආපු එකේ standard error එක නෙමෙයි තියෙන්නේ 10000 වයින් ආපු standard error එක. So what they do is something like this. First let us just look at a situation when it is divided into two. Like I can half here. Some sample surveys, this whole survey is divided into two parts. Right? So using individual parts, they get their estimates. අපි හිතමු මෙතනදී මේක හොයාගත්තා කියලා පළවෙනි half එකේ 150 million unemployed people හිටියා. දෙවෙනි half එකේ මෙච්චර unemployed කට්ටිය හිටියා. The two samples different numbers. එතකොට මේ දෙක pool කරොත් එහෙම වෙන්නේ අපිට මේ අංකය. So that's the pooled estimate from these two. එතකොට මේ දෙකේ වෙනස තමයි ගන්නෙ standard error එක විදියට. එතනදී දෙකක්. So they say they take the difference between these two. That's so මේ අතරම ගණන් කරන මොකද මේ pooled එක තමයි අපේ overall estimate එක. මේකෙන් මෙයාගේ වෙනස ප්‍රමාණයයි මේකෙන් මෙයාගේ වෙනස ප්‍රමාණයයි average එක වගේ දෙයක් තමයි ගන්න ඕනේ. Right? That is the variability. of individual estimates from the average. එතකොට ඒක ඒ වගේ දෙයක් තමයි කරන්නේ. නමුත් ඒකම නෙමෙයි. right? දැන් උදාහරණයක් විදිහට පළවෙනි එකකින් එන estimate එක 150යි. මේක තමයි pooled එක. ඒක අතර වෙනස මෙච්චරයි. දෙවෙනි එකේ estimate එක මේක තමයි pooled එක. that is the difference. So what they do is actually take the average of those two. Average නෙමෙයි. මේකේ
deviations from the average.
these deviations are due to both what is it?
Deviation from the average.
ඔව් මේ තියෙන deviations from average. ඒක මේ දෙකම පාවිච්චි කරලා තමයි අන්තිම standard error එක ගන්න. standard එක උගල අරන් තියෙන්නේ හැබැයි ඔව් දැන් සාමාන්‍යයෙන් ගන්නකොට මේකේ වර්ගය අපි deviations වල වර්ග කරලා ඊට පස්සේ එකතු කරලා ගණිතයෙන් කරන්නේ. නමුත් මෙතන උදාහරණේ පොතේ දීලා තියෙන වෙන එකක්. පොතේ දීලා තියෙන්නේ මේ දෙක අතර වෙනස ගන්නවා කියලා. පොතේ දීලා තියෙන්නේ මේ දෙක අතර වෙනස ගන්නවා කියලා සෑරේ මටත් ඒක තේරුන්නේ නැහැ හරියට. පොතේ තියෙන්නේ මේ විදිහට the difference between these two තමයි measure කරනවා කියලා කියලා තියෙනවා. ඒතර මේක කියලා තියෙන්නේ they are using 0.1 as the standard error. ඒ කියන්නේ දැන් මේ දෙක අතර වෙනස මේකයි ඒක දෙකෙන් බෙදෙනවා. ඒතු අර deviations වර්ග කරලා දෙකෙන් බෙදලා නෙමෙයි මෙතන කියන්නේ. හැබැයි ඊට පස්සේ ෆෝමියුලා එකක් දීලා තියෙනවා මේ විදිහට. ඒගොල්ලෝ අපි මේක k ප්‍රමාණයකට බෙදුවා නම් කියන්නේ ස්ප්ලිට් කරා නම් k ප්‍රමාණයකට එතනදී ස්ටෑන්ඩඩ් එක පාවිච්චි කරනවා කියලා අර වර්ගෝණීය සමීකරණය දීලා තියෙනවා. මේ dk කියන්නේ ඒකට ඕනෑම එකක මේ එස්ටිමේට් එක අර පූල්ඩ් එකෙන් එන වෙනස
Deviation from
deviation එක මම හිතන්නේ මේක තමයි හරිය. අර පොතේ පොඩි මට පැහැදිලි මොකක්ද කියලා ඒක පොතේ තිබුණ විදිහට මම ගත්තා. So this is the correct method I think. You divide the population into k subgroups using each subpopulation subsample they get an estimate and then calculate dk's, right? The difference between that estimate and the pooled estimate. So they can measure එකක් ලැබෙනවා how varied the estimate is from the average. ඒ වගේ වර්ග කරලා ඔක්කොම සමහර ඍණාගයන් සමහරව ධනාගයන් ඒකට වර්ග කරලා average එක. So that's what they use as a measure of the standard error of the estimate. Okay. මෙතනින් එහා පැත්තට තියෙන ටික හරියට descriptive. I think you can read either the lecture note or the book. ඉතින් එහා පැත්තේ කිසිම calculation එකක් නැහැ නිකම් description එකක් තියෙනවා. So I will omit that part. They talk about the quality of the data. They show how they explain what they do to keep the quality, right? කොච්චර පරිසම වෙනවද මිනිසුන්ව train කරන හැටි ඊට පස්සේ supervisor වෙනම sample එකක් අරන් check කරන හැටි ඒ වගේ දේවල් ටිකක් තියෙනවා. So you can read them. So we'll take a small break and then go to the next section. So this one actually briefly gave you idea about how difficult actually to do this kind of survey and how much work going on